The first thing I noticed was the silence. Not the peaceful kind of silence that settles over a town after sunset, but the heavy kind that makes you feel as though every window is watching you. I had barely stepped out of my truck when the old man at the gas station stopped me by the arm and whispered, "If you're going to the house at the end of Willow Road, turn around now." Before I could ask why, two women standing near the market stared at me with the same warning in their eyes. Everyone in town seemed to know where I was going, and everyone seemed terrified that I would get there. But I had already driven 300 miles for one reason. I had received a letter from a woman named Clara, a woman I had never met, telling me that my father had left something behind for me in her care. She had written only one sentence that kept repeating in my mind, "Come before it's too late." If stories about second chances and unexpected kindness mean something to you, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, leave a comment, and subscribe to Ripple of Kindness. Sometimes one small story can remind us that people deserve another chance, even when an entire world has already judged them. I drove toward Willow Road just before sunset. The town became smaller behind me until there were only dark trees, broken fences, and an old dirt road disappearing into the woods. At the very end stood a small blue house with peeling paint and a porch that sagged toward the ground. There were no lights in the windows. I stepped out of my truck and walked toward the front door, wondering what kind of woman could frighten an entire town simply by living alone. Then the door opened before I knocked. Clara stood there. She was older than I had expected, perhaps in her late 50s, with tired eyes and silver beginning to show in her dark hair. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. She looked at me as though she had been waiting for this exact moment for years. Then her lips trembled into the smallest smile, and she said, "I hoped you wouldn't listen." I felt a chill run through me. She stepped aside and let me in. The house smelled of old books, rain, and something warm cooking in the kitchen. Every wall seemed covered with photographs, but most of them were turned face down. On a small table near the fireplace sat an old wooden box with my name written across the top in my father's handwriting. My father had died when I was 12. For most of my life, I had believed he was simply a man who walked away from us. My mother never spoke badly about him, but she never explained why he disappeared either. She only told me that some people leave because staying hurts too much. I had grown up carrying the quiet belief that I had not been worth staying for. Clara watched me stare at the box. She told me my father had been her closest friend, and that he had spent his final years helping people in the town. He repaired broken roofs without charging families who could not afford repairs. He brought groceries to elderly neighbors. He once sold his own truck to pay for a little boy's medical treatment. Yet when I mentioned these things, Clara looked away. Then she told me why the town hated her. Years earlier, when a terrible fire destroyed several homes, Clara had been blamed for starting it. People said she had been angry, unstable, and dangerous. The rumors spread until no one would speak to her. But my father had refused to believe them. He investigated the fire himself and discovered that the electrical system in an abandoned building had caused it. He found documents proving it, but before he could expose the truth, he became seriously ill. Clara had kept the documents safe. She opened the wooden box. Inside was my father's old watch, several photographs, a stack of letters, and a small envelope with my name on it. My hands shook as I opened it. The letter was only 2 pages long, but it changed everything I thought I knew about my life. My father wrote that he had never abandoned me. He had been sick for years, and he had been afraid that if I saw how weak he was, would remember him only as a dying man. He had asked Clara to watch over the evidence and deliver his belongings when I was old enough to understand. He had wanted to return home, but his illness had taken that choice away. At the bottom of the letter, he had written that he was sorry for every birthday he missed, every school event he never attended, and every night I wondered why I wasn't enough. I couldn't stop crying. For years, I had blamed myself for a man's absence when the truth was that he had been fighting a battle I knew nothing about. But Clara wasn't finished. She told me the town had never forgiven her because she had refused to confess to something she didn't do. People preferred an easy villain to a complicated truth. My father had stood beside her, and after he died, she continued protecting his evidence because she believed one day I would come looking for answers. I asked her why she hadn't simply left. She looked toward the window and said that leaving would have meant accepting the lie. She had spent years alone, carrying the weight of a town's hatred because she believed the truth mattered, even if nobody wanted to hear it. The next morning, Clara and I went into town together. The moment people saw us, conversations stopped. Faces turned. Some people walked away. Others stared at me as though I had betrayed them by standing beside her. But I carried my father's letters, the documents, and the evidence that could finally prove what had happened. We went to the town hall. For nearly an hour, Clara told the story she had been too exhausted to tell for years. Then I placed my father's evidence on the table. An old electrical inspection report confirmed what he had discovered. The fire had not been Clara's fault. The room became painfully quiet. Then the oldest man in town stood up. He was the same man who had warned me at the gas station. He looked at Clara with tears in his eyes and admitted that he had been wrong. He said that years ago, fear had been easier than truth. One by one, others began apologizing. Clara didn't celebrate. She simply closed her eyes and breathed as though she had finally been allowed to put down a burden she had carried for half her life. Before I left town, I returned to her little blue house. She had prepared dinner, and for the first time, the photographs on her walls were turned face up. My father's smile appeared in almost every one. I realized then that sometimes the people everyone warns us about are the very people who have been waiting for someone brave enough to hear their side of the story. Clara had not stolen my father from me. She had spent years protecting the last pieces of him. I stayed that night. Then I stayed another week. Eventually, I stopped counting the days. I repaired the broken porch. I painted the house. Clara planted flowers beside the steps. The same people who once crossed the street to avoid her slowly began stopping by. Some brought food. Some brought apologies. One elderly woman simply sat beside Clara on the porch and held her hand without saying a word. And I finally understood something my father had tried to teach me through a letter written years too late: forgiveness doesn't erase what happened. It simply refuses to let pain control what happens next. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, share it with someone who believes in second chances, and subscribe to Ripple of Kindness. Your support helps stories like this reach people who may need a little hope today. And before the story ends, I want to ask you something special. Comment, everyone deserves a second chance, if you believe people should be judged by the truth of their hearts, not by the rumors told about them. Years later, whenever someone asks me why I stayed in that town after everyone warned me to leave, I think about Clara standing in that doorway, smiling through tears, and saying the words that changed my life. I hoped you wouldn't listen. She wasn't talking about the warnings. She was talking about fear. And sometimes, the greatest act of courage is simply refusing to let other people's fear decide whom you are allowed to love, trust, forgive, and understand.